everybody, and welcome to week 4 of Kickstart, Fueling My Day with Gratitude. This has been a great series, and it's really all about launching, your day, or launching your week, or your year, or even your entire life in a healthy, thriving, and fruitful direction. Now, the first 3 weeks for me have been great. They've stretched me and made me really kind of think about things, and there's some really great sources of ignition and fuel for this launch that I want to revisit. But before I do that, I just want to remind you about this gratitude journal, this Kickstart gratitude journal that we gave you on week 1 and has been available ever since. And if you haven't got one yet, you can grab one at the location where you're at. Or if you're watching online, you can simply email hello@tcconline.tv, and we'll ship one right out to you. Just give us your name and address, and we'll get one to you. Well, this journal's been great for me. It's stretched me in some ways that I, quite frankly, didn't expect. You see, I have no problem being grateful for things. But what I've really kind of been challenged by is being mindful of the things that I'm grateful throughout the day and not letting the worries and struggles and challenges of the day bury me, but my gratitude to carry me through the day. And then with that journal came, a challenge. We invited you to take a challenge, and most specifically, we asked you to take a 90-day tithe challenge. Now, I love this challenge because this is a step that I know many of you have already taken in your lives. You tithe, you even give beyond that. My wife and I have taken this journey for some time now, but it hasn't always been the case. You heard part of my story just a little while ago. And I actually really like sharing my story of generosity and my story about tithing because, I think it gives people a sense of hope. And I love that my wife and I, we took time to invest in our own children too, and I'm very grateful to be able to say that my kids believe in generosity too. So I hope that even if you haven't taken it, maybe you would start right away, or even start building toward that tithe. We say around here, and I love this, that generosity, a generous life is just a better life. And today, I'm going to tell you exactly why that's true. Well, we have these, what I like to call kind of building blocks, or actually I've kind of thought of them over the last few weeks as kind of fuel tanks. And we want to fill these tanks so that we have a good, healthy launch. And the first week we talked about gratitude, and I actually think of this as kind of the point of ignition. You know, when you're launching a rocket, right before you launch, you ignite the rockets, and then it's fueled along the way. And so gratitude is that launching point. And then in week 2, Casey actually talked about grace, embracing God's grace, which for us is full and complete, and yet came at a really high price, didn't it? Jesus paid a price that you and I could never pay. He gave his life so that we could have life because of God's grace. And not just a full life here and now, but hope of an eternity in heaven with God, and thereby avoiding torment apart from God in hell. So I hope you've embraced his grace. And then Ben last week talked about God's blessing. And he really helped us to learn how to recognize what God's true blessing is, and that we would receive that blessing. But not just receive it, but then be willing and able to share his blessing. Well, today's topic is contentment. The Bible has a lot to say about that. But in this gratitude journal, if you've been doing this journal like I have, you actually recall just earlier this week, there was a day that I call the if only page. And it was all about contentment. And we have this tendency, even though we've experienced God's grace and blessing, we have this tendency to look around us at other people and at their lives. And we begin to maybe get jealous of what God's given them or what we think they have that's different or better than what we have or what we've been given. And we begin to say, if only I had then. If only I could just. If only things would turn. Or my favorite, if only my life would only. And we become discontented with the grace and blessing and richness that God has already given to us. Well, like I said, he has a lot to say about contentment. And I think before we look at what God has to say about it, it would be helpful for us to define what contentment means. Contentment simply means the state of being satisfied, or to have an ease of mind or a restful mind. Now, I know a lot of people really kind of think that if I allow myself to become content, then that's just going to kill ambition in my life. And that's not true. You see, contentment is not the same as complacency. Contentment doesn't kill ambition. Contentment simply, well, I think it keeps ambition humble. It tempers ambition. And contentment actually helps us to move forward. It just helps us to move forward in the right direction, and I think with the right motives. Contentment, in tempering ambition, it actually helps us to focus on that which is eternal rather than that which is temporary. It helps our focus to be on others and not on self. And contentment, much like gratitude, well, it has to be learned. Contentment has to be learned and cultivated. That's how we remain content and understand how valuable contentment is and can be in our lives. We're going to take a look at a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to his apprentice Timothy and see what God through him has to say about contentment. Let's start. But godliness, which simply means being spiritually pure, and being spiritually pure, well, that actually leads toward attitudes and actions that reflect the image and character of God. So godliness, or being spiritually pure with contentment, which, as we said, means being satisfied or having an ease of mind, is great gain. It's of high value. It's of really important purpose in our lives. Paul continues, for we brought nothing into the world, as he unpacks contentment, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Paul actually here does something that when I really began to lean into this was kind of unexpected. He takes contentment and breaks it down to the absolute bare necessities and most basic of human needs. And here's what he says: food and clothing. Food and clothing. He says, if we have food and clothing, we will be content. Now, I find this very interesting because for many, many years, I've counseled with people and coached people who have trouble with their money and things like that, and I talk to them about basic human needs, the absolute necessities of our lives. Now, I think in our culture, here in the United States, now other places around the world, I get it's different. And 2,000 years ago, it was different then too. And I think God really wanted Paul to say and for us to understand that if we can have food and clothing, we should be able to be content with that. But I got to be honest, where I live, food and clothing just isn't enough. So I'm not sure God would mind if we contextualize it to today and say food, clothing, shelter, and transportation. This is what I've said to people for many, many years. Think about meeting those basic human needs first in your life. And here's what we do in our culture. I've done this in my own life, and if you're being honest, I'm sure many of you have done this too. We start to redefine those basic human needs of food, clothing, shelter, and transportation. We kind of redefine to the type of shelter, or the quality of the clothing, or how many kinds of transportation do we really need? And then we begin to add more things to what these basic human needs are, and we call it fame, or extra stuff, or power, or status. Ultimately, what we do here in our culture, what I've seen happen time and time again, is we define basic human needs as, well, more. Just more. There's a problem with that. There's a problem with that kind of definition, and it creates in us a dissatisfaction, a discontentment. And here's what Paul says about that problem. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Now, I actually like to call this the failure of bad focus. Now, here's what happens when we allow ourselves to get caught in the failure of bad focus, focusing on the wrong things and the wrong priorities. Well, we fall. We begin to fall. We fall into temptation and traps that will cause us and others around us harm. We fall into harmful and foolish desires. And then that word plunge, it kind of made me think back to my childhood. You see, I think of plunging into something or plunging, into a pool full of water. And so I'm kind of a medium-sized guy. I mean, maybe you can't see all of me on camera, but I'm a medium-sized guy, but I can make a really big splash in a pool because many years ago, I learned the tips, tricks, and techniques of learning how to cannonball into the water for maximum displacement to create a huge splash. Well, that's a lot of fun. This kind of plunge, not so fun. Because when we fall into these temptations and traps and foolish and harmful desires, we get plunged into ruin and destruction. Ruin and destruction, ruined lives, ruined relationships, ruined businesses, and I would say even destroyed cultures and environments. And here's why. For the love of money. Not money. Money is a useful tool, right? The love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have even wandered from the faith. They've lost their trust in God and pierced themselves with many griefs. Becoming discontented with our lives, with the blessing and grace that God has given to us. Becoming dissatisfied. Unbridled ambition. It ruins everything eventually. But then Paul takes a turn here. He turns us toward, a more perfect pursuit. As he continues in this letter to Timothy, he says, "But you, man of God, you, Tim, flee from all this." From all what? From love of money. From wanting riches for the sake of riches. From being eager for money for the sake of having more money or more stuff. Flee from all this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. And ultimately, I think this takes us back full circle to how Paul opened this portion of the letter. He said, godliness plus contentment, it equals great gain. Great gain. High value. Meaningful purpose. That's what godliness plus contentment means for you and for me, but not just for you and me, for others as well. We've talked about what it is. We've talked about what it means. It's of high value, great gain. It fuels us into a healthy, thriving, fruitful direction. So how? How do we learn contentment? How do we cultivate it? Well, I think one really important way is to control our spending, to control our money, control your funds, your spending, control your money so that your money does not control you. A number of years ago, my wife and I say my wife and I because we do life together, but really this was my doing. We lived on about 110% of our gross wages. Now, those of you who understand the difference between gross wages and net wages, living on either, like 100%, 10% of either of those is not sustainable. What that means is we weren't managing our money. We were managing our debt. And you can't manage your debt because your debt ultimately will manage you. It will control you. And your money controls you too. Well, I discovered this was not sustainable. Big surprise there. And so we began to make some changes. We began to make some shifts, to reprioritize some things, to begin to learn how to live generously toward others and stop trying to satisfy an appetite for self that never seems to go away. An appetite for stuff continues to grow. It always does. And during our journey of reevaluating and reprioritizing how we control our money, we came across a really great resource called Financial Peace University. Now, what I love about Financial Peace University is it gives you baby steps. This is a 9-week training course, and it's robust, but it's full of great resources and great tools, and it taught us so many great tips on how we can gain control of our money and get debt paid off. And what ended up happening is Gloria and I learned how to live on less than we made, not more than we made. And we've had the privilege of not only sitting through Financial Peace University, but even facilitating and leading a training course several times. In fact, a few years back, while going through a Financial Peace course, I was leading the course, we had some financial challenges. We had a well collapse at our home, and we had to dig a whole new well. I had to have oral surgery, and then we had a tax liability that was unexpected. It kind of caught us a little bit by surprise. But here, so in the time period that we were having Financial Peace University and facilitating this course, I had expenses additionally to our normal living expenses of over $11,000. And here's what happened. It was an inconvenience, not a crisis. Because what Financial Peace University taught us was how to have an emergency fund. And we were able to build up an emergency fund so much so that we could pay cash for all these things that came within a month time period during the training course. And I was able to use that as a personal, real-life example for the group that was participating. It was an awesome experience. Yeah, I didn't like spending the money, but we had the money to spend because we had learned how to control our money so our money didn't control us. In fact, we live on less than 60% of our wages now because we've learned, and Financial Peace University was a great tool for that. And here's what I love about TCC. We like to come alongside people. So we're not asking you to do something that we're not willing to come alongside and help you with. So we are preparing to host not one, but 2 FPU classes starting right after the 1st of 2023. And you can actually register now. It's live right now, the registration. tcconline.tv/events. You can go register, and for a modest investment of your resources and more valuable investment of your time, you can get coaching. Brittany Kant is going to host it right here in DuBois at our DuBois location. She's a certified FPU coach, and I love the fact that she's going to use her talents and skills and experience to help people in their journey. And my wife is going to help her, and then I'm going to work with our campus pastor at our North Central campus, and we're going to do it at the same time. 2 classes, same time, starting in January. I hope you'll join us if you want to learn more about how you can control your money so your money doesn't control you. Financial Peace University is a great resource. Now, Jesus also taught about how we can learn and cultivate contentment. And here's what Jesus had to say. Jesus said, "Don't store treasure on earth." Now, Jesus is not saying you shouldn't spend treasure on earth. He certainly knows that we need money to live our lives. He wants us to use money, not let money control us. Not to desire money just for the sake of money. So he says, don't store treasure on earth where moth and rust destroys and where villains and robbers can come in and steal. He said, but do store treasure in heaven where moth and rust cannot destroy, where robbers cannot come in and steal. Let me see if I can illustrate this point. You see, we do this thing called Christmas Wish this time of year. Many of you have already chosen a child to buy Christmas gifts for. And we're working with our local CYS agencies for foster kids, and we're also working with a nonprofit that works with inmates at one of our county jails. And what I love about this journey is we're actually able to buy presents for foster kids, things that they can own for themselves, and buy gifts for children of inmates who would not otherwise have a very special Christmas. And so what we're going to be doing for these inmate children is we're actually going to be hosting at our Clearfield location a Christmas party for those kids and their caregivers. And we're going to be doing a pizza party and fun snacks, and there's going to be a Santa Claus and giving them Christmas treats. And that night at the end of our party, we're actually going to be giving them their Christmas gifts directly to them. Here's what I love about this. This is helping people to know that people love them because Jesus loves them. And Jesus loves them with no strings attached. We get to love on people in a way that they would not otherwise experience, thereby helping them to know how valuable they are to God, how they themselves too can embrace His grace and experience His blessing. That's storing up treasure in heaven. And when you give to the churches that we participate in, TCC, when you give to the mission, you're helping to support things like this. That's storing up treasure in heaven, where moth and rust cannot destroy, where robbers cannot come in and steal. And then Jesus concluded His teaching with this. He said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be. That's an interesting order, don't you think? Jesus said, where you put your treasure, where you invest your money, that's where your heart's going to be. I think He was very intentional. I just absolutely believe Jesus was very intentional about the order in which He said those two things. He could easily have said, where your heart is, that's where you'll invest your treasure. But He didn't say it that way. And I think He knows where we spend our money, that's where our passion's going to be. That's where our heart is going to follow. That's what we're going to love the most. So if you want to learn contentment, invest your treasure, invest your resources, invest your money into the things of God toward heaven, thereby storing up treasure in heaven and having your heart and your passion follow that treasure. In my research on this topic of contentment, I came across a gentleman by the name of Joshua Becker. Now, Joshua, he's a former pastor, and he's a believer in minimalist living, so much so that he's a minimalist living trainer and coach. And he's also an author. And I just think he's a ninja in generosity in that topic of what it means to live and be a generous person and live a generous life. Here's what Joshua had to say about generous people. He said, generous people have learned to find joy in what they already possess. Learn to find joy in what they already possess. God's grace, His blessing, things in this world. They've learned to enjoy what they already possess and give away the rest. In other words, they have found true contentment. Or maybe you could also say contentment found them. They've learned and cultivate contentment. And that's what generosity does. That's what learning how to control our spending, control our money does for us. Now, at the end of this subject matter, at the end of this first letter, Paul writes these words to Timothy as final instruction. He said, command those who are rich. Command. I actually looked up that Greek word. Parangale is the Greek word. I'm not sure I'm saying it right, but here's what it means, to command. It's a little bit stronger than the word urge or admonish, isn't it? Paul said, command those who are rich in this present world. And you're wondering, who's really rich, Dan? And we all have different definitions of rich, don't we? And it's always more than what we have. Well, here's what I want you to know. I did the research. If you have household income of $41,000 or more, you are richer than 97% of this world. 97% of the people in this world have less than that. And I know there are people watching and listening right now who make less than that $41,000 in your household income. I get that. But here's the thing. most of us have way more than most people in the rest of our world. And here's what he said. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, not to have a high ego, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. It's temporary. But, he says, put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. I love this. God is not telling us not to enjoy the things we have, or even enjoy the money that you earn. He's simply saying prioritize it. Control your money. Prioritize your spending. Live a generous life. He continues. Command them, there's that word again, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. And in this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age. Does that sound at all like what Jesus said? Don't store treasure in this earth, but store treasure in heaven. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be. So that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. A life that is truly life. A life that is full and fruitful and fulfilled and content. Being satisfied. Having an ease in our mind and in our spirit. Having a restful spirit. Not dissatisfied. Not discontented. That will fuel us and launch us into a healthy, thriving, fruitful life. Would you pray with me? God in heaven, I'm so grateful for the stretching that you've done in my life in preparing for this talk. The stretching that you've done in my life by simply utilizing this wonderful little devotional gratitude journal. And helping me not just to be mindful of the things I'm grateful for, but mindful throughout my day so that the burdens and cares and difficulties and challenges of this life don't weigh me down, so that I don't become discontented and dissatisfied, but so that my spirit can be satisfied with who I am in you and the grace and blessing that you've given to me. And so, God, my prayer is that we will all learn and cultivate contentment in our lives and do so by living generous lives. We're so grateful for these opportunities that you give us to learn from you. And we ask that we will be a blessing to others as you have been to us. And we'll thank you for that in your name. Amen.